Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business. This is Jessica Dewell, your host of Red Direction. You are listening to How to Approach Conflict. When we talk today with Blair and with Federico, I have to tell you, not only can we go really big, not only can we get really narrow, it's interesting to see how, regardless of the size, the super tiny straight in front of us in this moment, to the gigantic choices, what's going on around us culturally and being influenced to us by generations and generations of people, what we're learning, what's influencing us, and how that implies our reactions to and our approach to this conflict. This show is about some strategies, some tips, and a whole lot of stories to really recognize that we all have conflict. Conflict can be good. It can be bad, as Blair put it, constructive or destructive. And it really starts with the fact that we naturally want to cooperate. So when we're faced with conflict, we may just want to turn our heads and pretend it doesn't exist, or whatever our version of avoidance actually is. So take a listen to Blair and take a listen to Federico and see what they have to say.
Welcome to the Voice of Bold Business, the show that provides everything smart leaders need to evaluate situations, build relationships, and create solutions. Jessica Dewell candidly talks about the skills necessary to build tenacity and do more with less. And now, here's Jessica.
Blair Glazer is a psychotherapist. She's got some acronyms like MA and LCAT. She is an executive coach and an organizational consultant who delights in helping people stand in their authority at home and at work. She helps leaders and their teams grow through creating clarity, strategy, and by increasing leadership and relationship skills. She has worked in the private practice for 17 years with leaders and teams in prestigious organizations such as JP Morgan Chase and Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Her articles on modern love and business practices appear across the interwebs. Blair lives and works in the most famous small town in America, Woodstock, New York, and frequently commutes to New York City. Dr. Federico Fioretto is an entrepreneur, trainer, and coach, passionate about sustainability and the development of human potential. He believes in the possibility to transform all conflicts and provide ways for everybody to work toward a common goal. I have this really cool ebook called The 7 Ways to Lead When You Don't Have the Answers. One of the things that comes up that's a really hard one to ever have an answer for is conflict. As I was contemplating, I was like, well, how do I handle conflict? And how do my employees handle conflict? And how was conflict handled in the house where I grew up? And how is conflict handled in the house that I live in now? And how is conflict handled in the places that I volunteer, whether it's Girl Scouts or Business and Professional Women or any of those other places? And it's interesting to note, I noticed they're almost all different. They have very little similarities, which begs me to think about this concept of, well, we've got conflict, we know about it, yet it's inconsistent in how we approach it. And so having this conversation today, how to approach conflict, makes all the difference in the world. Because if we're all playing by different rules, how can we ever make something that, even if it doesn't feel good, could still allow a working relationship or a connection of some sort? All right, Federico, I want to know, what's your process for handling conflict?
An interesting issue for me for a long time, because I've been a very conflictual person in my youth, because I was not very much at peace with what I was doing in my life. And that's how I ended up in developing actually an original method for transforming conflict, which is the CASE method. It's based on some knowledge about how human beings function. And that's very important, because what you mentioned is real. Everybody deals with conflicts in different ways. But the problem is that we are very much culturally influenced in thinking that approaching conflict in a way where we try to prevail on the other is natural, whereas it is not. As human beings, we are a social species, so we are naturally inclined to cooperate. to find win-win solution because we thrive when we cooperate. But until we can take away that cultural influence, it's hard for us to get into a situation of conflict with the idea that it is natural for us to get out of the conflict with a cooperation that is beneficial for both of us. So basically, the way I approach conflict is through fundamental trust in the capacity of the human being to get down to truth, to express his or her basic needs. And then that's the way where we can find a commonly beneficial solution. Basically, it's a faith that human beings can transform conflicts into opportunities to cooperate. And so far, I have never been disappointed.
All right, Blair, tell us, what is your process for handling conflict?
I took this question seriously, and I found that I had to give some context to it, which is that I don't actually see conflict as one thing that happens. I see it similar to you. There are different ways in which we experience tension with other people in different environments. And so the first thing would be to understand that there might not be just one way to handle conflict. I also don't think that conflict is inherently bad. It's our feelings about conflict that get in the way. And some of the things you mentioned, like how conflict was handled in our home, but conflict is an essential aspect of creativity. All great things happen through collaboration, which means there's going to be difference, which means there are going to be different things coming up against one another. And through that tension, something new and exciting can happen. So a lot of my work is being able to help people become less afraid of conflict. And there are a couple of guidelines that I use. One is we often focus too much on what we're fighting about and not enough on what we're fighting for. Professionally, this is more easily addressed because in teams and at work, we can agree on a mission. So if two people have a different idea of what color the logo should be and why, at least they can remind themselves that the goal is to get the word out in a way that represents what they're both working for. In couples and at home, it's not always easy to know what it is you're fighting for. In my work that I do with couples, in my therapeutic work, that is one of the things I help them establish is what is their vision and mission as a couple so that they can get out of the weeds of the story of the conflict and more into how their position will contribute to that vision and to be able to stand behind it and negotiate until there is a win-win, a compromise that feels right. So those are some of the things that came up for me when you asked as preliminary work around conflict.
Okay, preliminary work. And you both alluded to that is, hey, we've got to start somewhere. And being able to know our end goal is to get to something that we want. How do we start to get there? Can you guys give us some tips about how do we know when a conflict is brewing?
Great keyword is fear. A very important quote that I can take from Johan Galtung's work, which is that the conflict is an apparent difference in objectives. The fact that it's just apparent, but it's a delusion. It's not really that we have conflicting objectives. It's just that we begin to be fearful that the other is kind of hindering us from achieving our objectives. So when we start to get fearful, then we become to be defensive. We start to make interpretations. We start to make assumptions. We start to attribute to the other part an intention, a real plan, hidden thoughts and objectives. The basis of my process is just stick to facts. Let's try to get to facts. What is really happening? And start to look inside. How are you feeling about this? What I ask people usually is, talk to me about yourself. Tell me the facts, and we try to discern the facts from interpretations or assumptions, and then tell me about your feelings. How are you feeling? So we can make a difference and set them aside. And this is a very important first step. And the second is, what are you trying to achieve with what you are demanding? I very much agree with what Blair was saying about objectives and keeping in mind what is the bigger goal that we may have in common, in the end, we have in common the objective of thrive as human beings, or as a couple, or as a company, depending on the context, as a team. So we have to remind that, but it's important also to ask the person, what is your objective that you are trying to achieve? Conflict for me is not only between people, it can be for one single person to have an internal conflict between objectives. So then again, you have to go back and trying to find your priorities. And then you may find a conflict there. But the way to deal with that is always the same. Let's try to state the facts, name your emotions, and remember the bigger or the priority number one goal.
All right, Blair, what would you add to that?
There are so many things that got sparked off from Federico's conversation. I don't remember the initial question.
That's okay. Just go with where you're at. It's all good.
Okay. I know. You said, how do you know you're approaching a conflict? So we were talking about the preliminary work of conflict. If you want to become a master, there is a certain kind of awareness that I recommend people step into. I know what it feels like when a boundary has been crossed inside of me. I get a rush, a mix of fear and aggression, and it kind of bubbles up right from the center. I become more alert. In that moment, that is a cue to me to understand what my objective is and how I want to handle the emotional aspect of the conflict. And that takes a lot of years. And last night, I felt it all come up and I decided to not be responsible about it. You know, it's holiday time here. My partner crossed a line and I thought, I'm just going to sulk. But in better times, I can realize, is this something worth my time? Is it something I even need to discuss? If I want to discuss, what the best way to discuss it given the circumstances? And so that would go to what Federico is calling objectives. And also, I really want to focus on impact. What do I notice about the impact, about the way I'm holding my side of the conflict on the other person? Am I actually furthering this conversation to a useful place, or am I having a negative impact that makes the conflict destructive rather than constructive?
I was told this phrase the other day, and I'm totally making a t-shirt out of it. Not my zoo, not my monkeys.
I've heard it with circus, but I like it with zoo too, yeah.
Isn't that funny? I like circus too. So basically it's like, oh, okay, I recognize there's something going on over there and it's not mine and I'm okay with it. I need this boundary in this place I can work from and see, and then go, I got my own emotions over here, my monkeys. And they got theirs over there, they're monkeys, and they may or may not play nice, but how can we come back to the facts, the what and the how? How can we understand that maybe sometimes the conflict we're experiencing is coming from our lack of clarity ourselves and how we're showing up in this conversation, as well as how do we know the triggers within ourselves? Okay.
There is a team that they should have a common objective, and the team is not working. And they are not achieving their goals, and cooperation start lagging behind. It's not working. And what happens is that they are not achieving the goals of the team. So to me, that's a conflict, because it means that some members of the team, or all of them, has lost sight of the objective because they are together. They are together because they have objectives that they want to achieve. They are not achieving, so there's a problem. What's the problem? That they're working for different objectives. And in my definition, that's a conflict. What I've done in a situation which was apparently desperate, like, is someone going to resign? Are we going to fire someone? Is what are the basic needs of these people? What are their individual objectives that they are trying to achieve, because they have lost sight of a common sense? And to me, that's a sign. We have a mission together. It's not working. We are not achieving. So we have a conflict between objectives, or we have a conflict between, would we say, motivation? Maybe the leader is not helping his or her people. Why? He or she is distracted by what? by something else, which is conflicting with the main priority that is having the team that works well. So that's a sign. We should do something, it's not working.
You just outlined such an incredible discipline for conflict, and so few people catch it, which is that if you're in this breakdown where two people are polarized, which is usually what calcified conflict turns into. It's usually two people, maybe it's two parties, totally calcified. What is being avoided is this question of what are we trying to create that we haven't found language for. And so we're just sticking in our old positions rather than actually join in that creative, generative place of, since it's not working, it's probably because we're trying to create something new together. And if you can find a way to get people on a team on that task, a lot of new stuff will come. It's difficult, though, to be in the unknown of that. I think organizations especially like to think that there's certainty. So having a skilled guide, it really helps.
You are listening to the voice of Bold Business Radio. This is How to Approach Conflict. I would like to have you guys talk a little bit more about this win-win, win-lose, what compromise really is.
How many hours we have?
I know, right?
That's the question.
So I asked a good loaded question then. Excellent.
Well, to me, compromise is never a good solution. In a compromise where you have, how is it in English? Cartesian axis.
Sure.
Diagram, right? If you have 100 for A, 100 for B, you draw a line between them, and the point of compromise, the best that you can have is 50-50. Let's think about a very classic example. You are discussing or fighting about a territory, about a land, and each one of the two populations has a claim on 100% of the land. And
we don't know any countries that are involved in this struggle or anything.
I'm not naming names. Anyway, if you give 50-50, they will be satisfied for 50% of their claim and dissatisfied for 50%, which is a lot. It's really a lot. So I always talk about transformation of a conflict. For me, transformation is trying to get to 100% of satisfaction for both parties. And that implies a lot of creativity. We want to make it very, very, very simple. And of course, we could discuss for days or years. The best is that both populations learn how to live together and share the land and have creative ideas on how to thrive and prosper together. Because even if you satisfy one of the two populations 95%, they might be very much satisfied, but there's still this 5% of dissatisfaction. But the other ones who are dissatisfied 95% will never stick to that compromise in the long run. So this is a very basic example, but we know what we're talking about.
I don't agree with you guys. I have tried to live in a utopian vision of the world where everyone gets all their needs met at the end of the conflict. And I find that to be laborious, never-ending, unexpedient. I think compromise is a bad word all of a sudden. Maybe not all of a sudden, but like since the 80s. I think that there are certain compromises that shouldn't be drawn. But if you're talking about groups of people moving together to create change, I think that a win some, lose some way of managing differences is probably going to be your most expedient and most efficient way. That's me.
May I reply?
I'm so glad I asked this question. Please take it away. I might just sit back and glass of water for a minute.
One of my mentors, Professor Piero Giorgi, taught me a very important lesson. This gets back to my passion for peace studies. We have to have a vision when there is a situation that we want to transform, and we have to have objectives for the short term, for the mid-term, and for the long term. And we have to have tools to deal with the short term, the mid-term, and the long term. So I'm certainly not saying that compromise is never something that's never to be pursued. Mm-hmm. Certainly, it can be something that can just cool down the temperature, and that can allow for some temporary solution, and can help, for instance, parties that are very much in a hard conflict to sit down and have a talk. And then again, if I could use a graphic, we could bend the line of compromise from 50-50 and trying to start with, why not 60-60? I mean, let's start to be more creative. So compromising can be a very good way to say, okay, let's stop bombing each other. Let's just sit down and start to talk. But in the long term, I'm thinking in dimension of time,
like decades,
we need to find a way where all our basic needs are met. And that's the stable solution.
Okay. We can't please all of our customers, which is why we have niche markets, which is why not every service and every product is available and ready to be used by every single person. The same is true in an organization. We thrive on a lot of different ideas, and a lot of those ideas come to where the company needs to go, yet not every single person in the organization is a leader. Sometimes those ideas are used, and those leaders then are responsible to come back and look at it from a different view and the priority of the business and the priority of the goals, in making sure that those people with all the ideas continue to have jobs and can provide for their families. And the company is on the path the company needs to be. There is no compromise there. And that's actually something where I think leaders tend to fall short. They think they need to make everybody happy within their team or their organization to be able to move forward. And that dilutes the actual effectiveness of what they're trying to do and achieve their deadlines and deliver a product that people really want.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be kind of in line with what I was saying, that sometimes the ideal of everyone getting their needs met really isn't possible if the work of the organization isn't to meet the needs of the participants. It's to do bigger and greater work in the world.
And here's the thing, on my team, they know where we're going, but they may not understand all the time what the priorities are, because they're looking at how they fit in their specific role. And so if I go into another company, that's the first question I ask. I'm looking for gaps. There's this particular area where we have all these great ideas, but nothing ever happens and everybody leaves. Well, those are pretty good indicators that somebody's not really clear. And that's usually the person who is managing all of them. We're talking about people, and I was talking about organizations. And now we have organizations that want the best of everything. The organization is trying to be seen as a person. Yet at the same point in time, the organization is trying to be profitable. For lack of a better description, they're talking out both sides of their mouth.
They're not dealing with their inner conflict.
Exactly. They're polarized all on their own. They don't need anybody else's help. We're just watching in surprised craziness going, not my zoo, not my monkeys.
A profit company is not responsible of the social well-being in every aspect of the population of an area. But first of all, any human organization, as well as any human being, should be responsible for not harming or damaging the basic needs of the people or the communities they are impacting upon. For a business company, an industrial company, you have employees, you have customers, you have suppliers. What are the basic needs that these people ask you to match? There is equality issues, there is a fair pay issue, there is good motivation and satisfaction on the job, there is matching the needs of your clients because of the products or the services that you are delivering. But of course, it depends on what they are asking you and what is the responsibility that you are taking towards your stakeholders. When you have taken a responsibility, you have that responsibility and you have to respond to that need. That's why I'm very much opposed to the very common concept of CSR, where business companies pay for kindergartens or charities, and maybe they make a lot of money from unsustainable businesses. I prefer very much that the business company has a sustainable business and they use their money in order to make investments for more sustainable processes, more sustainable products, and of course they pay fairly their people. And maybe an internal kindergarten is a very good idea for helping people with children to work well in the company. But they are not charities, and they need to be good corporate citizens in a way that is, they do sustainable business, they respect the needs of their stakeholders that are humans, they respect the environment, and they try to go zero impact as a long term.
And the other side of that is the people who are looking at businesses and where they're choosing to spend their money can totally choose to buy from that company or not based off of whatever, based off of the fact they may or may not like the advertisers that are allowed to pay a network money, for example, or based off of the way customers are treated, or based off of the impact of a local or national or international impact of some sort.
Oh, I have a question, if that's okay.
Please.
For you guys, because we've been talking about conflict and we've been talking about it so far, the type of it that's very manageable and getting to the humanity of people and being able to come to something bigger than a compromise. So let's say you've got a company who is doing harm environmentally, and a bunch of constituents say, you're having a really horrible impact. And they say, no, we're not. All of our scientists say that our products are fine.
We have this thing here where it's actually called Rocky Flats. I don't know if you guys know about this. They came in, they were testing plutonium bombs. They were setting all kinds of poisonous fires on this. And then they went out of business, and there's a big mess that was left in the community to clean up. Now these people that are trying to clean it up want to open it back up and let kids play there after just 30 years. What creates a movement is the conflict that people are experiencing in their own lives, and they come together for that common goal to move forward and create awareness and to create conflict in such a way that allows these organizations that are trying to be people on one side and businesses on the other, their business first, they're looking where they're going to get validation, right? If I only look for the things I think I already know, that's all I'm going to learn kind of concept. And so that's where the outside piece comes into play. And so I don't have an answer necessarily, but I think that us as individuals show up in a different way when we're faced with that.
I think we are dealing with different issues here. The first case that Blair was suggesting, if, for instance, the company is in good faith, what I would advise them to do would be to share their information and to set up a committee for discussion with the local stakeholders, the local people, and try to really go for the best truth that they can assess together. So have some independent scientists and really share all their information. If you have a look at my website, I have a case history of this kind, and it worked in that case because the company was really in good faith. And they thought that they were doing no harm. And in fact, they set up this committee helped by the local authorities. And in the end, they were able to develop a technological innovation in the process that took away the bad smell, which actually was not toxic, but was very much scary for the population. The second case that if I have got well the story that Jesse was sharing, it appears that the company was not very much in good faith. They were just using some kind of authority that they had to go there, to be there and to pollute the environment. And then somehow people had to fight in defense of their health. So in this case, the situation is different because there aren't two parties that want to sit down at the table in good faith and trying to find a transformative solution. So the nonviolent resistance is the best way. But in order to do that, we as a people, we have to walk a step further, which is make ourselves independent from the idea of they are giving us jobs, because there is very often this blackmail from businesses that say, well, we pollute your area, but we are giving jobs. We have a very sad situation in southern Italy here, where there is a big industrial company right within a big urban area. There are, for tens of years, there have been people dying from cancer and other pollution-related illnesses, and everything was given in exchange for jobs. So we have to rethink our way of being economically independent and gain more strength for nonviolent resistance to against people not in good faith.
You know what they're doing here? Developers are zoning right up to that. And when you buy your house and your land, you're signing a waiver that says, if you ever get sick, it's not our fault. You just bought the land from us. And you know what? That is not in good faith, in my opinion.
I think what we're talking about is that some conflicts can't actually be resolved.
I think so. There's going to be
there's just two people in complete difference, and there needs to be something where the fight is sustained until there is a triumph of, I was going to say good, but
a triumph in general, right? Triumph, period. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And maybe this is one of those things that takes generation. We were talking about land earlier in the conversation. So whether it's environment, whether it's land, whether it's business against people or people against business.
Whether it's oppression,
people against people. You're right. It takes time and decision and values and people to stand to those values when it gets really hard.
It takes awareness. It takes awareness. Because what is happening now is that bad companies are being pressured by their stakeholders, by their customers who are voting with their wallets. Yes. They are becoming more aware and they are demanding more respect for their basic needs. So sitting on the other side as a sustainability consultant, this is what I give as a good argument for business companies, industrial companies to go for sustainability. Because you can that risk of your stakeholders coming against you because you are polluting or using fossil fuels or that kind of stuff.
We're talking about gigantic things that seem really big. So let's bring it back down to the people side. You've got a team and the team is not working. And you recognize that on the team, there are just two personalities, two people that no matter what you try and do, how you try and get them to work together, they can barely get through because there is conflict that is unresolvable. How do we get along when there is no compromise and there is only constant conflict?
That would be one of those cases for me personally where I think that the stories of the conflict and the stories of the personalities are entrenched in such a way that dealing with it head on is not going to yield different results. There has to be a branching out, talking to the other people on the team and finding a way, as Federico said earlier, to get underneath to find what is that question brewing that perhaps these two people have gotten assigned to play out the conflict that the larger company is asking. When you come to the basic truth that your values and your vision is not in alignment with a greater group, it's extremely freeing to own it and to move on. That's actually a great outcome.
I like it. Okay.
Today I was challenged by my client to say, well, you're a conflict transformation consultant and you are a divorced man. So
I love those challenges. That means that you were doing very well. You were doing very well in order to get that kind of pushback.
But I said to him, you should talk with the judge that handled our divorce because we were in such good terms and in such an agreement about parting company that the judge at the point said, why are you divorcing? You seem to go along so well. There are different ways in which you can part company. And what I would say about the situation and the original question on this point from Jesse, there is a very important keyword for me to approach conflict, which is respect. We should respect the fact that people can have disagreements, and we should very much make apart the person from the behavior. So maybe a person has a very disturbing behavior at a certain point, but from his or her point of view, that person is very much justified in order to have that behavior because of his or her state of mind, because of his or her objectives, and we are not in his or her shoes. Respect is a very, very important starting point. From the point of respect, we can start asking the magic question. Okay, I respect your position. What are you trying to achieve with this that you are demanding? And maybe through this process, at a certain point, you arrive to a situation where you understand, as Blair was saying, that your values or your objectives or whatever is not compatible. But then there is respect, and you can part company in a respectful way, and it's perfectly normal. And that really creates a void where one or the other or both can build something new and which is more fit. Mm-hmm. So it's not a tragedy.
I have to say something here, though. I really want to interject with an important point for anybody who's listening that's saying that everything he's saying makes sense, and there's this one person that I don't think that'll ever happen with. And that is that there are certain personality disorders that you cannot be in a rational discourse with. They don't have those inner facilities. They are sometimes abusive, even though you can respect the person who's trapped inside that personality disorder. If there's anyone listening who is in a conflict and they've tried to be rational with somebody and they haven't been able to find a way, it is possible that that person is suffering from a personality disorder. And the best thing to do would not only be to walk away, but to get help, because that person will probably try to re-engage you in some kind of conflict for a long time. And I think that that's another important aspect of conflicts that don't work out in the win-win situation, or divorces that don't happen in the kind of situation that you and your wife, because you're mature and aware and heart-centered people, I'm assuming, can get to. There are certain people that don't have those facilities, and if you learn to spot them, you can save yourself a lot of heartbreak and a lot of insanity that gets put onto you.
That can happen.
That can happen. So we have gotten some tips. We've gotten some strategies. We have actually explored how conflict happens to us and how we look at it at this great, big, global scale, as well as right here in this space in front of us scale, this very small space. All of it comes down to awareness. And awareness is a set of skills. So the last thing I want to hear from you guys today, and this is going to be really tough, is to think about awareness and the skills that make up awareness for you. Pick one. This is the bold part. You're going to pick one skill in awareness that you would like to tell us is incredibly important to support this concept of approaching conflict.
Forgiveness.
And tell us why.
When we are in a conflict, we can think of it for analogy as a fight, we start immediately to suffer in a way, because that's not a natural state. And we start to suffer. And when we start to suffer because of the conflict, we start to blame the other person for our suffering. And that puts more petrol on the fire, so to say. To me, forgiveness is something that takes away that fuel, because we just stop blaming the person, and we can maybe more objectively look at the behavior of the person. Okay, admit there's pain. I'm feeling pain because of this behavior, but I'm not reacting with blame, starting to shift responsibility, to put everything on the other and putting myself in the position of a victim. The person who forgives steps out from the role of the victim and really becomes the lord of the situation in a way.
All right, Blair.
You can change your entire relationship to conflict by studying the choreography of the way that you get ensnared into conflict, of the way that if you're in partnership, your partner contributes to that. You can do it by yourself, you can do it with your partner, but to study what are the things that happen that get me to that place where I'm lost in some kind of loopy fight that goes nowhere. And if you break that down and you begin to study that, and you get clear on, well, this happens to my hands, or this happens to my eyes, and you start to pay attention, you then begin to have choice. You can say, I can continue to follow my emotions in this fight, and we know how that usually ends up, or I can remove myself from the situation. I can find a way to get back to some kind of rational thinking and go back in and see what, if anything, needs to be said. Because oftentimes, nothing really needs to be said.
Yes.
Conflict is so often just a way that we're blowing off steam on each other. And if you can get hip to that, which is a very challenging thing to do because it's so much easier to make someone else bad. But if you can get hip to that, you have so much more mastery over conflict in your life.
You will find all the program notes at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com/P51. That is thevoiceofboldbusiness.com, P like program, 51. You can also search how to approach conflict. Make sure after you listen to this episode that you subscribe to and rate the Voice of Bold Business Radio on your preferred listening platform. We want you to get the next episode and the next episode that air every Tuesday and Friday directly delivered to your queue. Share your story and experiences because you add to this conversation. You are what makes the definition of being a leader today in business. It's all about you. And as being all about you, we are interested in hearing the tips that you have on how you approach conflict.
Subscribe at thevoiceofboldbusiness.com and get more information, program notes, and past episodes. Bold leaders approach each situation and focus on action to achieve a higher level of leadership. Jessica Dewell, your business advocate, is the host of the Voice of Bold Business Radio. Thank you for joining us.